When I first started teaching this play, it became obvious that there were a lot of references to ill-fitting clothes and to crowns that do not fit. And there were some scenes within the play that I found difficult to understand their importance or their purpose. And so I started to do a little bit of background reading again on who King James was, because this was the first play that was commissioned for the first King James of England. And so what I learned was his history and his ascent to the throne was not without great turmoil. Now, a lot of things I knew in part, but I really had never learned. So let me take you through a little bit of this. Remember that understanding context in any piece is really critical, because if we try to use our 21st century lenses to read a piece, we're almost always going to miss the nuances. So spend time with context. We have to go back to King Henry VIII. And how much do you know about the Tudor line? Now, it was a very fragile hold on the British monarchy. And here's another interesting question. Why would Shakespeare write about a king's assassination and the rightful heir, who the rightful heir to the throne would be, in the first play that he produces after the coronation of King James I? I mean, you're talking about a play in which the king is assassinated. Regicide is the central focus of this play, and what causes that. And this is the play that you produce for this young king? Interesting. All right, so we have King Henry VIII. Now, in Henry VIII's time, England was Catholic, and Henry VIII was not supposed to be king. His older brother Arthur was, and Arthur had married Catherine of Aragon. But when Arthur dies suddenly, Henry assumes the throne, and so it is arranged that he will marry his dead brother's widow. Now, by all accounts, she was beautiful. She was a strong woman. She was a Spanish princess, and so it was uniting the two countries. And they have 6 pregnancies during about as many years, but all but one die. Okay, so they're either stillbirths or premature births, and one son lives to be a few months old before he dies. One daughter survives, Mary. Okay, but when she cannot give Henry a son, he moves to have the marriage annulled. And under the Catholic Church, it's as if it never happened. Well, obviously, they were married, and so she refuses to grant the annulment. The church refuses to grant the annulment. And so there becomes a problem. He begins to woo Anne Boleyn. Okay, and he eventually has he just breaks with the Church of England, and they become Protestant. He moves Catherine of Aragon out of the house, has the marriage annulled, marries Anne Boleyn. They have one daughter, Elizabeth. Now, many people do not recognize this as a legitimate marriage, and there is just widespread hatred for Anne Boleyn. And when Anne Boleyn cannot give him a son, he accuses her. He tries to have the marriage annulled. She won't go along with it. The church won't go along with it. And he eventually has her accused of treason and adultery even with her own brother, and has her beheaded. So now we have 2 daughters that are surviving. All right, come on to wife number 3. All right, remember England was Catholic. Henry requested to annul the second marriage. The church, represented by Sir Thomas More, who wrote Utopia, refuses to grant the annulment. If you have time, read about Sir Thomas More. He's just a fascinating man. And he refuses to capitulate to Henry, and Henry has him arrested. He has all of his books and his contact with the outside world removed. Eventually he takes away his bed. He's trying to force him into doing what Henry wants him to do, and he won't. And eventually he is executed. But he lives on, and there's a famous play called A Man for All Seasons you might want to look at. All right, so now we're to wedding number 3. Okay, this is Jane Seymour. She died from complications in childbirth, and she was the only queen to be given a royal funeral, and she is interned with Henry. Now her son, Edward the Sixth, ruled from the age of 9 to 15. When he becomes ill at 15 and knew that he was dying, he married his cousin, Lady Jane Grey, and declared that she would be the heir to the throne, so that England could remain Catholic. So we're going to keep going, and we'll go back to that story here in a minute. Wedding number 4 is Anne of Cleves. She gives no son. He has that marriage annulled. She has learned from her predecessors not to argue that. All right, wedding number 5 is Catherine Howard. Again, she has no son, and she is beheaded for treason and adultery. Finally, wedding number 6 is Catherine Parr. If you're keeping track, that's 3 Catherines, 2 Annes, and a Jane. She also is unable to give him a son, but she outlives him. Okay, so let's go back to this first story. So you have Edward VI, who dies at 15. When he realizes that he's dying, he marries his Lady Jane Grey, and she rules for 9 days until Mary, who's the daughter, the oldest daughter, has Jane locked up in the Tower of London and beheaded. She stages a coup. She has the document that Edward VI had signed making Jane the heir ruled illegal, and she takes the throne. All right, so following the death of Edward VI and the execution of Jane Grey, Bloody Mary assumes the throne. Now, she's called Bloody Mary because she is Catholic, and she is, in contrast to her father and brother, declares England Catholic again. She begins burning Protestants at the stake, earning her name Bloody Mary, and it's a pretty violent time, and she rules for 5 years. All right, so again, we're back to the question, what does this have to do with the play that we are reading? Okay, so when Mary marries, try saying that 3 times fast, Mary marries Prince Philip II of Spain. And when she dies, 5 years later, Philip declares himself King of England by marriage and sends the Spanish fleet to enforce his decree. All right, bring on Elizabeth I. She is now, after the death of Mary, has become the Queen of England. And so when this happens with Prince Philip, she has to defend England. She has to find a way to fight against this mighty Spanish Armada. Okay, so remember that her reign was always contested. You know, she was a woman. First of all, Catholics did not acknowledge Henry's marriage to Anne Boleyn. Many people didn't, not just the Catholics. And so her legitimacy was in question. And there was another thing. So her cousin, Mary Queen of Scots, when her first husband, who was the King of France, dies, she remarries and has a son, and she has to escape from Scotland. The son is declared, King James is declared as the ruler of Scotland, and she has to leave because of some other political things. She comes to England. Elizabeth sees her as a threat, has her imprisoned and eventually executed. But the story goes that she promises Mary Queen of Scots that if she does not fight against that because Elizabeth never marries, she never has children, she will declare James, Mary Queen of Scots, the next heir. And that's what happens, okay? So here we are back in this story, and we have James taking the throne. Okay, so all of these references to not having the rightful heir on the throne might be a discussion of this lineage going on. Remember, the Scottish play is the first play produced after James I ascends to the throne, welcoming the Jacobean period. Jacob was his nickname. That's why it's called the Jacobean period. So he has the Elizabethan era and now the Jacobean period. King James is also best known for commissioning the King James Bible so that the common people could read the scriptures in their own language and not need to rely on the priests to interpret the Latin. Pretty interesting story.